It's another Thunder Thursday, and yes, it is trade deadline day. It has come and gone, and the Thunder has become their way of doing things. They're making moves on trade deadline day. We're here to break it all down, to look at who's coming, who's going, and what it might mean moving forward. I'm Jenny Carlson, joined here in the studio by our Thunder coverage team, columnist Barry Trammell, Thunder beat writers Eric Horn, Brett Dawson. Right at the deadline, essentially a few minutes before 2 o'clock, we find out that the Thunder has done a deal with the Chicago Bulls. They're sending 3 guys. They're sending Cameron Payne. They're sending Anthony Morrow. They're sending Joffrey Lauvergne, but they're getting Taj Gibson and Doug McDermott, as well as a second-round draft pick next year, 2018. Barry, this seems like a win for the Thunder. Pretty big win, in fact.
Looks like a good trade to me. You're getting a really good player in Taj Gibson. Now he's got an expiring contract, so you may only have him for the rest of this season, but he's clearly the player in this. And you're getting the best shooter in the bunch. Anthony Morrow, just his touch has been gone. Doug McDermott, young, promising shooter. Shot 42% a year ago, down in the 36-37% range this season. But to me, it's a good trade, guys.
Yeah, I mean, improvement, Eric, is the word I think we're kind of throwing around here.
Yeah, totally. And, this was never going to be a move that was going to get the Thunder all the way into title contention, but it's definitely a positive move. You get an upgrade at power forward and a guy in Taj Gibson who could potentially come in and start over Domantas Sabonis. He's definitely an upgrade over Joffrey Lauvergne and Sabonis. And then you get a guy in Doug McDermott who, he shot the ball particularly well, as Barry said. This year he's shooting 37% from 3, I think like 40% from the corners, and that's with a volatile point guard situation in Chicago. Russell Westbrook's probably going to get this guy pretty good looks when he gets into the lineup with Westbrook, even though I don't think Doug McDermott's going to start. It'll probably still be Robertson at small forward. But McDermott offers some versatility in that he can play some small ball forward too as well, and that's the floor spacing that everybody's been looking for. And they also get an unprotected second-round pick in the trade as well. So the Thunder made out pretty well in this trade, and you got to feel pretty good about their chances to go and chase after the teams in front of them for the 4 and the 5 seed.
Well, and I think that what you said is right. There was probably no 1 or 2 things that could happen, Brett, that would get them to, say, the Warriors level, the Spurs level, maybe not even the Rockets level, but they're definitely looking like they're going to be able to make an assault on those mid-range spots in the 1 to 8 rankings there in the West.
Yeah, and I think they're better built for the playoffs. I mean, I think they're just a better playoff team. They can space the floor a little bit better, I think, with McDermott. And Gibson's a really good player. I mean, I think it's you don't want to undersell the fact that Taj Gibson is a really good player. For however long they have him, he is a significant upgrade in the starting lineup if they choose to start him over Domantas Sabonis. But it's also, they've built themselves a team now. They have the easiest schedule in the NBA, almost the easiest schedule. It's in terms of win percentages, their opponents coming up. Mm-hmm. It's the maybe 4th lowest in the league. They play the fewest teams with winning records. They got a chance, I think, to make a real run at 50 wins, at improving their seed. This is a significant move for them.
Well, and Eric, you want to jump in?
And then, the addition of Gibson also plays into a strength that the Thunder already had. They mashed teams on the boards. Yeah. So this guy's going to come in and just destroy teams. I mean, whether he's coming off the bench or starting, you're going to get Enes Kanter back too. I mean, there's going to be some serious frontline power for the Thunder going forward, and Taj Gibson is a guy who already fits into what they like to do in terms of, be able to defend multiple positions. He's a guy who can defend centers, power forwards, maybe even stay with some small forwards, because he's a pretty nimble dude. And he's a good defender.
He can get out on the perimeter and guard some guys.
Yeah, he's a good defender.
Yeah.
So, but it plays into what the Thunder already has. And it also strengthens what they already have as well.
Well, I want to talk about lineups here in just a second, but let's focus first on Gibson and that contract, because one of the things that I kept coming back to in talking about this trade deadline was the Thunder needing to acquire guys that weren't going to be short-timers. There's a chance Taj Gibson will be a short-timer because his contract does expire at the end of this season. But Barry, as you look at it, as you look at who he was traded for, if you want to sort of look at it that way, they didn't trade a long-term guy. They traded a guy that was, or guys that were going to come up at the end of their contracts this year as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about an expiring contract for Taj Gibson, but Anthony Morrow, Joffrey Lauvergne, same way. So, I don't know if the Thunder will re-sign Taj Gibson or not, but this gives them a little more cap flexibility in that he comes off the books. But if they do want to overspend past the cap or whatever they need to, they can do it since he's in their fold. You're not going to give Lauvergne or Anthony Morrow a big contract, but their ability to sign really good players is somewhat limited, but it's a little less limited now with Taj Gibson.
I mean, maybe there's a chance he comes in here, guys, and it's a good fit. I mean, I think what I've seen at least is that this is a really good player who probably got into a situation where it just kind of cascaded downward. I mean, Eric, you mentioned the point guard position. Obviously, Dwayne Wade going home. It was trumpeted as a big deal, but has not gone well. I mean, this is a guy that maybe given a new surroundings, maybe we see that old Taj Gibson reemerge.
Yeah, and you know, he put up pretty good numbers considering you know, Chicago doesn't really have a ton of like floor spacing around him. I mean, he's going to do most of his work inside. From 10 feet out, he doesn't really have a good percentage this year, but inside he scores a majority of his buckets there, and that's what the Thunder's going to use him for, to just mash the boards and play good defense. And you know, he's coming from a situation in Chicago where they were really going nowhere, and they had basically everybody on the board in terms of being tradable. I mean, we had heard Nikola Mirotic, McDermott, Taj Gibson from as early as this morning in terms of guys that could be dealt to the Thunder. He's going to a situation where he's going to be able to play playoff basketball, and I'd imagine the guy's going to be pretty inspired to do so.
Yeah, when we saw the trade come through, there was some discussion in the newsroom. Could we have asked to see if the Miracle Mile would have been a possibility? I mean, what might the Bulls have thrown in if given the chance?
I would have taken the Willis Tower. I like the Willis Tower and Giordano's Pizza.
You know, somebody asked me on my chat this morning, hey, how about McDermott and Taj Gibson to the Thunder? I said, I don't think it's possible unless you give them Cantor. And I don't know that the Thunder wants to do that, but Sam was able to get those guys without.
Yeah, we were kind of kicking around some deals today, Eric and Darnell and myself, and you're looking at like what could you do, and could you ship Cantor here and get maybe all three of those guys? Maybe you get Mirotic and McDermott and Gibson, but without giving up. It's kind of amazing to have done this without giving up Cantor and without giving up Robertson. So you keep the core of guys who are really helping you win intact and add these two pieces. Cameron Payne may turn into a nice piece. Way too early for us to give up on him, whether it was here or in Chicago. But what he's done to this point this year doesn't indicate that he's ready to be a starting point guard in the NBA, which is what the Bulls may want him to be and what the value of the trade indicates they think he is.
I don't know if we've actually said his name yet, but is it time to just give it up to the almighty Sam Presti? I mean, this is the second time in a row he's come to a trade situation, a big trade situation. I'm thinking back to draft night, and he did that, what turned out to be an amazingly good deal for the Thunder, getting all those guys from Orlando for essentially Serge Ibaka, who's since been traded by the Magic, and now here we are again looking at a deal thinking there's no way that this works. You put it in all the online draft machines and trackers, and there's no way this computes. And now here we are again, Barry, saying, how did Sam Presti get this done?
Yeah, you know what, I think, I don't think Chicago's looking back now and saying, they fleeced us.
Yeah.
They must love Cameron Payne, or they must think they must see a lot. Perhaps they don't watch game film. I don't know what's going on there. But
Goodness.
I love Cameron, but he can't guard anybody. He can't guard anybody. It's unfortunate that the Thunder doesn't play the Bulls again this season, because Westbrook would go for about 64 points and 17 assists against Cameron Payne. But maybe the Bulls see something in Payne. You know, he's shown flashes of being a good offensive player. Not this season consistently, but he's been injured. So give him the benefit of the doubt. But to me, clearly, the Bulls took a flyer on Cameron Payne.
Yeah.
And the Thunder said, hey, these are two guys that can help us now for sure, and McDermott in the coming years, even if Gibson isn't retained. So clearly a good trade for the Thunder. We'll see how it goes for the Bulls.
Is the campaign, I mean, the fact that he was such a big rock in this trade, is that surprising to you guys? I mean, Brett, like you said, it's too early to say one way or another, but what we've seen has left a lot to be desired. He's obviously been hurt, but does that surprise you that he became such a big part of this?
I think he's only a couple years removed from being a lottery pick, and so it is. Who knows? I mean, maybe he gets back to what we saw, what certainly you guys saw flashes of last year, and what we've seen a little bit of this year, that ability to get inside, create, set some things up for other people. We didn't really see a lot of that after he got back, but 37 games is a ton of games to miss. You're stepping back into a totally different rotation. The thing a little underrated about how difficult his job is that he came back into a unit where he had a lot of guys he hadn't really played with. There was just so much change. So he didn't really get to practice with those new guys. It took a long time. He's doing a lot of things on the fly. I do think he's got a chance to be a good player. I'm just surprised that they were able to make a trade for him and some expiring contracts that netted them this much.
Yeah. brings us back to lineups moving forward, because Payne was that second point guard. Now assumption is Samaje Christian moves into that role. We'll talk about the third point guard here in just a second. But is Taj Gibson the starter? Does he move into that role? Eric, let's start with you. Does he move into that role?
He should. I mean, we've seen enough from Domantas Sabonis to know that, while it might be best for his comfort in terms of Billy Donovan saying he needs to play with those starters, he's not giving the Thunder enough punch in the starting lineup. You bring these guys in for a reason. You bring them in to maximize the roster, and I think Taj Gibson, being an NBA veteran, being a 30-year-old guy, will be able to seamlessly fit into the Thunder's starting lineup if they choose to do so. No matter what role they put Gibson in, I think he's going to be a great producer. And just the addition of McDermott just gives them added versatility. They can bring him in. They could even play him in the lineup with Westbrook and give Oladipo a rest now and not have to play him and Westbrook together all the time. They could slide Robertson to a shooting guard, which he's used to doing. And it's just a really good move in terms of flexibility for the team.
We talked earlier this year, Brett, about Sabonis and potentially moving him into that second unit and how he's so hard on himself. I mean, it's not, and if he moves out of the lineup, it's not like he got benched for somebody already on this roster or got demoted for somebody already on this roster. So is that different? Do you think that'll resonate differently with him?
Well, I think it has to. I mean, I think he just has to accept what's
Right.
going to happen, and they have to not worry too much about his feelings if they're worrying about, and his confidence if they're worrying about winning games. I think the Thunder played 57 games. Taj Gibson's played 56 playoff games. This is a guy who's, he's been around the block. He's an experienced guy. If they decide that he's going to start, you'd hope that Domantas Sabonis would understand that you're not being replaced by just some guy that they went out and signed a 10-day contract. They went out and acquired a guy. He is a guy who, by all accounts, was not touchable at the trade deadline. They weren't going to give up Sabonis. There were a couple of reports that teams at least had some interest. There wasn't going to be any movement there. So they're committed to him long term. I think they can sell him on that long term commitment and still say to him, "We got to go this way for right now."
Well, and I think another interesting aspect of this is if he comes off the bench, he's going to come off the bench with Enes Kanter, presumably. I mean, unless there's a real big shakeup that we're not expecting here, Barry. And that's an interesting second unit to put out there with two really young, pretty versatile big guys.
Well, it is. To me, you're wasting Taj Gibson a little bit playing him on the second unit because his strength is defense. Eric talked about his versatility. This is a guy that can body up and guard big men on the post. He can play the pick and roll. He's even got some Serge Ibaka in him that he can get out on the perimeter and chase guys around, and you can switch with him. That's less valuable against a second unit when you're playing the elite teams in the West. If you can start a lineup of Adams, Gibson, Robertson, Westbrook, Oladipo, that's a big-time defensive unit. Now, nobody's going to beat the Warriors. This Thunder team definitely not going to beat the Warriors. But that's a team that can match up with anybody else. So I think I would start Taj Gibson. We've talked about the second unit needing some offense, especially until Kanter gets back, which may be a while, may not be. But, you could run some offense through Sabonis coming off the bench. So I would start Taj Gibson. When the playoffs get here, I think Taj Gibson's a guy that's going to have to play 25, 30 minutes a game.
When you look at that second unit, it doesn't look too bad either. I mean, we haven't seen these guys on the floor together, obviously, but a healthy Kanter matched up with Sabonis and McDermott. I mean, and to me, I don't know how you guys feel, but Samaje Christian, I don't see right now as that much different than where Cam Payne was. So to me, that's kind of a apples to apples trade there. But those three other guys, that's a fairly decent and interesting second unit, Eric.
Yeah, and I think it'll be fine from the standpoint of you've already got a guy in Enes Kanter who's bought in so much to be in that sixth man, that kind of that second center or power forward off the bench, that Domantas Sabonis can't really pout about it because you've got a guy in Enes Kanter who's one of the most efficient players in the league coming off the bench right now, and he's not starting. So it's like Sabonis can sit there next to Kanter and say, well, I've got the perfect example of a guy who maximizes the most of his time coming off of the bench. I think it's a great situation for Sabonis to sit and kind of learn a little bit, and it's also a great situation for the Thunder to immediately upgrade their starting lineup.
Yeah. Let me remind folks, you're watching Thunder Thursday. It's the trade deadline edition. We're talking about all things trade deadline. And guys, a few interesting other aspects of today for the Thunder, and we'll try to hit on all of them here before we wrap up. open roster spot. Trading 3 guys for 2 leaves them at 14 right now on this roster. They don't have a third string point guard. Do you have to go get a third string point guard, Brett, or are there some other options?
Well, Kendrick Perkins is an option if you wanted to go out and get a front court guy.
Don't get my hopes up, please, by all
But
means.
to me, I agree with you to a certain extent about Samaje Christian, especially what he does defensively. But you might be trying to see if you can't find a second unit point guard, a guy who would play a few more of those minutes. There's not, obviously you're finished with the trade deadline, but there's going to be some guys who are waived. There are some free agents out there. New Orleans has been looking at guys. So if you just look at the list of guys New Orleans looked at, some of those guys might be of interest. Jarrett Jack is a guy who's out there. Darren Williams is going to be a guy who's on the market. I don't know that necessarily that's a fit.
Don't get Barry's hopes up. He is all about Darren Williams. We'll get to that in a second.
It looks like he's going to get bought out in Dallas. So, there might be some guys out there. I do think it makes sense to go out and look at least at 10-day contracts at the very least, if not a guy for the rest of the season, to sort of shore up that second point guard spot without paying. I would look at doing that. But, there's sentimental reasons. There's Kendrick Perkins always there.
We'll talk Kendrick in just a second. But, Barry, make the case for Darren Williams.
Well, I just think, we've talked about a shooter. This team needs shooting. But when you're talking about offensively, to me, almost as big a need as the backup point guard, because that's been a hole. And when Westbrook's off the court, especially if Cantor's not in there filling the bucket up, there's just not much going on at the point guard position. So if Darren Williams comes free, he's still a good player. He's no longer a great player. He once was an all-star. He no longer is. But he can still play. And if he's just out there free for the taking, I'm jumping on Darren Williams.
It's interesting. Eric, what are you doing with that open roster spot if you're Sam Presti?
Well, I just looked down at my phone, and David Aldridge said that if Darren Williams gets bought out, that he's likely going to the Cavs.
Oh.
So the Cavs are loading up.
Okay.
But that being said, Darren Williams would be a great idea. I like Mario Chalmers. He's lit up the Thunder in the past times that they played when he was playing for the Grizzlies before they let go of him. Marcus Thornton is a guy who could be an option. The Nets let go of him. He was traded to the Nets. Kendrick Perkins would be great for the locker room, but I don't necessarily think it's the best move in terms of the Thunder strengthening their offense. As we know, Kendrick Perkins is not a great offensive player. I think the Thunder's got plenty of defense that, as long as they play consistent defense now, particularly with the addition of Taj Gibson. What I think is interesting is with the addition of McDermott, how that's going to affect Oladipo running the second unit, because when you got an additional offensive player on the floor, McDermott, that can shoot, that might be able to let Oladipo run the second unit a little bit more, and it'll certainly give Christian more opportunities because Payne's not there anymore.
Barry, your eyes lit up at that.
Who was the Thunder's backup point guard last season in the playoffs?
Was Randy Foye?
Randy Foye, who's not a point guard.
Why did that take me so long to think of?
Not a point guard. With McDermott now and Alex Abrinas, one of those guys could come in early for Oladipo. Oladipo can return not as the guy as sort of the scorer for the bench unit. He could be your backup point guard.
Yeah.
That may be your answer. Victor Oladipo, backup point guard, as well as Russell Westbrook's running mate.
And we've seen a little bit of that already when Cantor has been out for the prolonged period of time. They've done a little bit more of that with Oladipo, staggered him just a little bit that way. Not so much to be the backup point guard, but just to get another offensive guy out there when Westbrook's off the floor.
By the way, speaking of looking at things on phones and laptops, I've got mine up here because you just never know what's still popping out this afternoon with the trade deadline. But Anthony Morrow going on Twitter and saying, "Oklahoma, thank you for all you've done. My family and I can't express what this last 2.5 years have been like. It's been a blessing." Nice sentiments from Anthony Morrow, who was part of some of the biggest and best moments in Thunder history, to be around for that, and some nice sentiments. But I don't think you expect any less from Anthony Morrow. He's been a great team guy.
One of the consummate Thunders. In my time covering the Thunder, he's been fantastic. Just always a guy you can go to for words or his opinion on something. He's an outspoken guy. He was a good teammate. He didn't complain about his minutes or anything like that, even though he had tons of people pining for him playing more, whether it was last season when Kyle Singler was playing a ton or even this season when Abrinas might have been struggling. But just a great guy, and you would wish the best for his family and whatever happens to him, whether Chicago or elsewhere.
Yeah.
Pure class.
Yeah.
Pure class.
Pure
Yeah,
class.
absolutely. One of the if you did an all interview team of the guys that are there now, it wouldn't take you long to get tomorrow. I mean, he would have not the guys who are there now anymore, but of the guys who have been here all this season, he's been great to deal with. Has a great sense of self, of history,
Yeah.
of politics. He's just a really smart guy, and it's a bummer not to get to talk to him anymore.
You know, and you really hope guys that maybe need a fresh start, and we're talking about Taj Gibson in that regard, needing sort of a change of scenery. Maybe Anthony Morrow goes to Chicago, sort of recaptures some of that shooting touch that we've seen him have from time to time, and gets it going. You never know. It's crazy how sometimes little things, well, it's not a little thing to change teams, but something like that where court's the same size, basketball's the same size, hoop's the same size, but everything suddenly changes. Who knows? Maybe that's a change.
And then he becomes a free agent, and he signs with Golden State or Houston and destroys the Thunder.
And we talk
Or
about
Charlotte, or the Charlotte thing, because he's from Charlotte. That
and
would
we
be a
talk
good place
about
for him.
the Anthony Morrow game.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's all those games out there, right? Okay, all right. So be interesting to see what happens with that open roster spot. We don't know who will fill it or how that will be handled, but another interesting subplot to trade deadline day is Andre Roberson, guys, because apparently reports out of Chicago, the Bulls were really interested in acquiring Roberson, and the Thunder basically said, no, we want to keep him, and we want to try to get a deal done. Guys, I think we were kind of all of the opinion, at least sitting up here, that he was probably going to be moved today just because they didn't get that deal done in the offseason. Brett, how surprised are you that he's still a member of this team?
I'm surprised. As we made sort of private predictions, I thought he was going to be shipped out, and that is the reason, that the history that the Thunder has with restricted free agency. I didn't think they were going to let him get to it. Didn't think they wanted to run the risk of him getting a big contract offer like a guy like Solomon Hill. There were some reports today they were trying to gauge just what it was going to cost them as it led up to the deadline, and that might have influenced their thinking. It was a weird day, and since he came out of a meeting today and hugged some people, and there were a bunch of us at practice who weren't really going to deal with that because you don't know what that means. It did get out, and then he had some fun with that on Twitter, posted a little meme of a Simpsons character that said, "I'm a hugger." But yeah, I think it's good for them if they feel like long-term they can keep him around. He's a good guy to keep on this team right now, and I think as you upgrade your offense a little, he becomes even more useful because it's not such a detriment to have him out there.
Yeah, he's a guy that fit well with this Thunder roster as it was built with Kevin Durant because there was so much firepower. You could have a strictly defensive guy, Eric, but now I have to think after the way the playoffs went last year, the thought within Roberson's circle was big contract coming. You're gonna make hay off of this, and who knows, maybe that still happens. But it seems like the great teams, the great scoring teams that would take an Andre Roberson, that's a fairly small group that would go looking for a guy like him. So maybe that money isn't there as much. What's your feeling about his situation as it relates to getting him re-signed?
I don't think the money's going to be there. We're talking about maybe like the 10 to 12 million that we thought he would have been getting when these crazy cap projections were coming out last summer. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's going to be there for Robertson because he's still just not a great enough shooter to command that much money. But I mean, 5 to 8 or 6 to 8 million, that's doable. That guy's a lockdown defender, and the Thunder might actually be willing to pay that. I mean, in the event that they have the available cap space and they're willing to go in for him. And I think it says a lot about how much the Thunder values what he does in order for him to come back to this team, because he's a guy that was a restricted free agent. He was about to hit restricted free agency. In the past, Thunder has traded those guys like Reggie Jackson that have come to this point and not had a deal done. They actually kept Dion Waiters last year, who was a restricted free agent, and they kept him in part because they thought Kevin Durant was coming back. And that you thought that would have been a situation where they deal Robertson because they don't have a Kevin Durant around. But you add a McDermott, who's an extra shooter. I mean, I think that makes Robertson's value a little bit more as well, because McDermott's not a great defender.
Right.
You put him out there and he can cover the holes for whether it's the first unit or the second unit. It's another affirmation that Andre Robertson has clear value to the Thunder, whether he's shooting well or not.
Yeah.
Andre Robertson he's a lightning rod because of how poorly his offense is, and he doesn't just miss shots; he misses them badly, and that's glaring to the average fan. It's glaring to the expert. I mean, it's alarming. But he also does something very, very well. And when somebody at the major league level, any sport, doesn't matter, but in the NBA, if somebody does something very, very well, whether it's play the pick and roll defense, whether it's scoring on the block, whether it's the three-point shot, whatever it is, they have value. And Andre Robertson is an elite defender. He can guard all kinds of people and guard them well. So it's a very good day when you can make a good trade and get in some stuff you need and not have to let loose of a Andre Robertson. When you look at what the Thunder traded off, Anthony Morrow, Joffrey Laverne, Cameron Payne, the truth is none of those three people were doing anything all that great this season. Andre Robertson was.
Yeah, that's great. Great point. And I think too, guys, I wonder if a guy like Doug McDermott, who's more of that outside threat that they've been looking for, maybe that changes the offensive thought process for Andre Robertson. We've seen him have some of his best success when he drives. When he goes to the basket, guys, he's fairly effective. Obviously, when you've got those wide open threes, it's hard not to take them. But maybe his mindset goes to, I'm a slasher. I'm going to get to the basket. Maybe I'll take a three every once in a while. But now he doesn't maybe have to in the same way that he did before. I don't know. Maybe that plays to his strengths, and the offense he does have can be maximized and sort of fills in the gaps there on the offensive end of the ball.
I think the presence of Doug McDermott, whether he shoots it at a high rate or not, is going to help the entire Thunder offense. It's going to help Andre Robertson when they're on the court. It's going to help Victor Oladipo. It's going to help Russell Westbrook. And I think that Doug McDermott is going to be a guy who can really influence the game, whether he even has the ball in his hands or not. Just he could be in the corner and be a guy who could create space for everybody.
Yeah. All right, guys, last before we get out of here, maybe the most unspoken part of this trade deadline day is the fact that the Thunder did not stand pat. They did some stuff to try to get better. And what does that mean to Russell Westbrook? What sort of signal does that send? Brett, before we went on to start recording, you mentioned this, so I'll give you first crack. What does it say in your mind to Russell Westbrook?
Well, and Eric wrote about this today, that the clock sort of starts on Russell Westbrook with this day. What happens here? We don't know, because Russ doesn't really talk about it. We don't know how he feels about the roster. We don't know how he feels about whether they need changes. We've talked about this before. He's not LeBron James, who's out in public saying, here are the pieces that I think we need. But I do think it's important to send a message to him that you're not standing pat, that you understand your weaknesses and that you're going to try to address them. And they did that. They didn't add a ton of shooting, but they went out and found a shooter. They went out and found a versatile defensive guy who's a better scorer than what they have at power forward right now. So I think it sends a clear message to him that while you may not be able to make a move that puts you in contention to win a title, you're also not going to stand pat and be in the middle of the pack or lower.
I think some of the looks that Russell Westbrook would give Joffrey Laverne sometimes, and some of the frustration that Billy Donovan had with Joffrey Laverne sometimes, I don't think you're going to get as much as that with Taj Gibson, who's a really rugged player. I think he fits the Russell Westbrook mold too, as well as terms of a guy who's going to battle and really just really get in there and fight like Russell Westbrook does. Not that Joffrey didn't do that, but he's not going to do it as much as Taj Gibson will. I assure you that.
Yeah, Barry, I know you can't do everything to the beck and call of Russell Westbrook, but it is important that you've got that level of player to do some things. If you're Russell Westbrook, how do you look at this day?
Well, I think, frankly, I have no idea how Russell Westbrook, just to be honest with you, I have no idea how he sees the world, but he should look upon it as an improvement. Now, Russell's like the rest of us. He knows they're not in the Warriors class. He knows they're not in the Spurs class. But Russell knows better than anybody where they're at, and he knows that today they're better than they were yesterday. And a guy like Russell Westbrook knows better than anybody how good Taj Gibson is. I don't want to try to paint this guy as an all-star, but this guy is an all-around player who plays tough defense, and as Brett told us, hardened by the playoffs. This guy's an experienced guy, just rock-solid individual. He's going to improve this team just by being around, and Russell Westbrook knows that. So I think Russell looks at it and says, you know what, this is a good day. This is the kind of guys we need on our team.
All right, guys, we don't know exactly when we're going to see the newest Thunder players in uniform. Thunder has a game Friday night against the Lakers. Maybe, I guess it's a possibility these guys will have to get here. They'll have to clear all the medical tests before they get to put on that Thunder uniform. But already we've seen both Taj Gibson and Doug McDermott on Twitter sort of pledging their allegiance with the Thunder Up hashtag or let's go or whatever. So they're in the know. They're on the way, and we'll obviously be figuring out when we can talk to them. We think we're going to hear from Sam Presti later today. We'll keep you advised of all that. But be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.